Good morning. Can't hear you. Good morning out there. Thank you. I'm David Foster, the Executive Director of the BlueGreen Alliance, and I'm delighted to be with all of you this morning at the start of our 7th Good Jobs, Green Jobs Conference. Now, over the years, as we've done these, in many ways, these gatherings to me have told the story of our country's recent politics, the good and the bad. From the economic disaster of 2008-2009 to the bitter disputes over the role of government, charting our economic recovery, to this long, painful slog of the last few years, attempting to solve our chronic unemployment problems and the growing crisis of global warming. And lately, it's also been a tale of two economies. One marked by soaring wealth, we all read about it. The other by stagnation, drift, and growing inequality. To some of our critics, I'm sure that good jobs, green jobs, must seem like a quaint notion. The idea that you can have both good jobs and a clean environment. But look at the alternative. Look at the alternative. Is it really good jobs and a brown environment? Is that really an option? Look at recent events in Charleston, West Virginia, where the rupture of chemical storage tanks at a company called Freedom Industries leaked over 10,000 gallons of toxics into the Elk River. No sooner had that immediate crisis ebbed than Freedom Industries declared bankruptcy, shielding itself and its owners from the liability of any of the problems they'd caused. Is this what they call good jobs in a brown environment? Or is this just a bad hangover of a 19th century way of thinking that somehow we can pollute ourselves into prosperity? Now, the story of Freedom Industries in Charleston, West Virginia, is also a story of the infrastructure that is failing America. And that's the theme of this conference. You know, last year, when we kicked off Repair America, I was surprised to learn that 15% of all the clean drinking water we produce in our country leaks out of the system before it even gets to our kitchen sinks. 15%. Corroded pipes, leaky valves. In some cities, we still use wooden water pipes that were installed in the 19th century. Charleston, West Virginia, it's even worse. 37% of all the clean water produced in that community for drinking is lost in faulty pipes before it ever gets used. And shockingly, what made this recent crisis even worse is that the water pipes that carried that contaminated water into people's homes couldn't be shut off because the pipes themselves were so corroded that they would have collapsed if not for the water pressure that kept the steel in place. Think of that. Now, most of us here in Washington today are not from DC. And from my home in Minneapolis or Leo's home in Pittsburgh or hundreds of other communities around America, Washington today looks like a place where it's impossible to agree on anything. But I don't think that for a minute most Americans want to be so vulnerable to water systems that don't work, transit systems that flood, bridges that collapse from disrepair, or electrical systems that are crashing with increasing frequency. You can't have a 21st century economy with wooden water pipes. And you can't solve a 21st century problem like climate change with the 19th century infrastructure that caused it. So the theme of this year's conference, protect, produce, prosper, sums it all up. We're going to hear from labor, business, and environmental leaders today and tomorrow that if we respond to the challenges to our infrastructure, if we invest in repairing America, we can have all the jobs we so desperately need. All the jobs, 11 million jobs that we need in this country. And we can fix the environmental challenges we face. We can have profitable, responsible companies, companies making American products with American labor. We can repair America's bridges and our water pipes and our transit systems with American steel. We can fill our streets with American-made UAW vehicles that are the most fuel efficient on the planet. You know, one lesson that 20th century America taught the world is this: a lot of wealth in a few hands is never going to be as productive as a lot of wealth in a lot of hands. That's the lesson of middle-class nations, and it's the lesson of America's greatest economic growth. We can go down that path again if we choose in every city, in every state, and yes, even here in Washington, D.C., when we go up on the Capitol on February 12th to repair America. We can do it. Thank you. And now I get the privilege of introducing someone who needs no introduction to this crowd. With 1.2 million active and retired members, the United Steelworkers are a force in America for a better life for all Americans. Their president, Leo Gerard, is one of the co-founders of the BlueGreen Alliance, who saw from his own experience growing up in Sudbury, Ontario, the vital need for environmentalists and union members to work together for a better environment and economy. Steelworkers are also in the forefront to repair America. From the steel that goes into rail and rail cars to the materials that go into making buildings more energy efficient, to create new pipes to carry water, the steelworkers stand ready to make the materials we need in America to repair America. So please join me in welcoming my friend and our leader, Leo Gerard, International President of the United Steelworkers.
Thank you. I can't help but reflect back when David talks about 7 years ago. 7 years ago, Dave Foster had an idea about creating an alliance he and I had talked about when he was on our board. Talked about creating an alliance between the labor movement and environmentalists, and we had been doing a lot of work quietly with the Sierra Club for many years, and we decided that we would create what we then called the BlueGreen Alliance. And we set out on one page the objectives of the BlueGreen Alliance to work together on reducing carbon, chemical safety, and trade. Those were the foundations of what we wanted to do. And we called a press conference, Carl Pope, myself, and Dave, at the National Press Club. And we believed, as we still do now, that was an important step forward. Only to end up at the National Press Club having me, David, Carl Pope from the Sierra Club, 2 or 3 staff that helped us make sure we got to where we were supposed to be on time, and 3 journalists, one of whom I think was drunk and didn't know where he was. That's not a criticism of journalists, because that could have just been us. And then you come back 7 years later, and you see what we've done. If you take the membership of the affiliate organizations that are affiliated to the BlueGreen Alliance, if we could mobilize those affiliates on the Repair America agenda, we would have 14 million. Think about that, how big the BlueGreen Alliance affiliations are. The organizations affiliated to the BlueGreen Alliance represent roughly 14 million members. Imagine what we could do to America and repairing America if we could mobilize that. You're the vanguard. You're the folks that are here. You're the folks that are here because you've got some interest. You've got some interest in making sure that we have a clean environment. You've also got some interest in making sure that we have good jobs. We have occasions where we work together on many things. I can give you examples of environmentalists who have stood with workers fighting right to work, fighting against paycheck protection laws, environmentalists that have stood with us on our collective bargaining goals. And we've stood with them on many issues. We don't always agree. Some issues we don't agree on. But the reality is this. We agree on 90% of the agenda. We agree that we have to repair, as Dave mentioned, our outdated pipelines. We have 2.5 million miles of pipe in America. Most of it is more than 60 years old, as Dave pointed out. Some it's 100 years old. We've got schools in America. More than 50% of the schools in America are older than 60 years of age. That means they're using antiquated air handling equipment. They've got antiquated ventilation and heating systems. They've got antiquated insulation systems. They've got antiquated wiring systems where they may or may not be able to bring broadband into their schools. You can go through a list. 86,000 bridges, I'm told, are defective in America. I know that in Allegheny County, where I live, cars and trucks have to do detours because certain bridges won't hold the weight. We just saw them building bridges. I don't know how many of you from California, or how many of you followed the Bay Bridge from California. It was 6 years behind schedule and billions of dollars over budget. Why was it? Because they decided they were going to get the steel made from China, and the steel made from China wouldn't hold the weld. They don't call it Chicago warming or Pittsburgh warming or LA warming. It's called global warming. And for every ton of steel that came from China, it produced 3 times the carbon emissions that a ton of steel would have come from North America. We were silent. We're silent. If we're going to repair America, and we want to do it with the most environmentally sound ways, we have to take a position that if you're going to use American taxpayer dollars, or for my Canadian friends that happen to be here, if you're going to use Canadian taxpayer dollars to repair the country, then damn it all, you're going to have to repair it with American-made products. Simple as that. Now, one of the things that David mentioned about Repair America is what the legacy will be if we don't do it. I can't figure out what's in people's minds or in their hearts when they want to pretend that we're not going through climate change. If you look at what's going on, I hope there's none of you in the room that are going to take offense with what I'm going to say. But if you got some of those damn nut job Republicans that, if there's any Republicans in the room, raise your hand. Well, put it another way, any nut job Republicans in the room, raise your hand. Look there's these deniers. All you got to do is look around what's happening in the world. They didn't say it was going to instantly happen. What they said is, as a result of evolving changes in the climate, we would have unpredictable weather patterns. If you look at what's happening around the world, we've got unpredictable weather patterns going on. We've got places where they never saw snow that are getting snow for the first time in history. We've got places that always had lots of water that are going through drought. And my question to them is, why take the chance? If we repair America, think about the grid. You want to talk about saving some energy and saving some carbon? Repair the grid. 15% of the energy that makes it onto the electrical grid, if it goes more than 200 miles, 15% of that energy is lost. Think about the water pipes. Think about the gas pipes. Think about the bridges. Think about the schools. Think about rapid transit. Think about efficient transportation. Think about, instead of cutting transfers and the ability of the communities to have transportation networks with buses and light rail cars, think about supporting that so I don't have to take my damn car as the only way to get to work. If we do all of those things, we will take enough carbon out of the air that will make a difference for our kids and our grandkids. And we need to challenge them. It's not enough for us to just talk to ourselves. We need to go to the municipalities. We need to go to the state level. We need to go to the federal level and demand that we repair America, demand that we put people back to work, demand that we save energy, demand that we leave our kids a better future than the one we inherited. You know, when you get up and the chance to get at these podiums and you get to look down over the audience, sometimes it's pretty scary, you know. I'm not going to comment on whether you're ugly or not, but what I'm going to comment on is a lot of people in here, and I won't ask you to raise your hand. There's a lot of people in here that are far, 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 far away from the age of 30. You know, I'm one of them. I want, when I finish my time doing the work that I'm privileged to do, that I can sit in a rocking chair or a lazy boy chair somewhere, and I can know that because of what we did together in the Blue-Green Alliance or in our labor movement or in our environmental movement or in our anti-poverty movement, we get all these movements that care about the same values we do, and we can build a better future. I want to be sitting in that rocking chair and have my grandson's son sitting on my lap, knowing that we created a better future for him. You're the vanguard. That's why you're here. It's not enough to come here and sit on your ass and listen to comments for 2.5 days. When you leave here, you got to get to work and help us rebuild America. Thank you. It's now my privilege to introduce a very, very good friend. He and I have been friends for a long time. And I won't say how long because that will reflect on his age, although he looks a lot younger than he is. The next speaker is my friend, the president of the AFL-CIO. Richard Trumka was elected president of the AFL-CIO in 2009, and he's been making strides in rebuilding America's labor movement so that we can rebuild America together. Richard, as you know, is the son of a coal miner who grew up in Pennsylvania coal fields. He worked in the mines while going to school at Penn State, and he graduated from Villanova with a law degree. He has spent his entire career fighting for the rights of working people, fighting for fair wages and benefits, fighting for a safe environment in communities, and especially a secure retirement for workers. Under his leadership, the AFL-CIO has led a charge to engage workers in a bottom-up effort to revitalize the labor movement, to reach out to women and minorities, to build strategic alliances with progressive groups, including environmentalists, in a fight for a tandem cause to bring good jobs to America in a safe and healthy environment. Please welcome the president of the AFL-CIO, my friend Richard Trumka.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you, Leo, for that overly kind, generous introduction. But more importantly, thanks for your leadership and thanks for your friendship. He and I have been friends and colleagues for a number of years, and I know anytime there's a good fight, I know Leo will be on the side of working people. Let me tell you that I'm honored to be here with all of you and to say a few words on behalf of the 12.5 million working men and women of the AFL-CIO unions. Today we're focused on the biggest issues facing our society, the intertwined challenges of an endangered global climate and our nation's endangered prosperity. Now, we must solve both of those challenges, and we must solve them at the same time. Why? Because they must be solved together, not just because it's the right thing to do, which it is, but because if we don't solve them both, we aren't going to solve either one of them. Now, runaway climate change and the threat of global climate instability endanger not only prosperity, but human civilization. Now, that's a fact that we dare not ignore. But we must face the political and the economic realities preventing us from action to stop climate change as clearly as we must look at the science. So today I want to talk to you about two realities that we must face, that we must understand, and that we must challenge. The first has to do with inequality and the way that inequality prevents action. And the second is trade, and how trade policies will undo everything that we seek to achieve if we don't change the way that our trade policies deal with carbon emissions. Now, President Obama rightly says that inequality is the defining issue of our time. It is also the key to the climate fight, because inequality erodes the basic sense that we are all in this together, and that together we must meet the terrible threat of climate change. But we did not become unequal by accident in the process. You see, for more than 30 years, powerful people have made economic decisions in this country with the clear purpose of lowering wages and diminishing the economic security of working people. Policymakers decided to engage with the global economy through trade deals whose real purpose was not trade, but empowering and enriching multinational corporations. And the ultimate result has been a downward pressure on wages and consumer and environmental standards. Now, corporate leaders took apart the pension system with the help of some pliant politicians. Other politicians chose tax cuts over investing in our future. And the result is a D-plus infrastructure. Public education drained of resources and under attack by the power of private wealth. Now, let me just tell you one fact that pretty much says it all. I recently returned from a trip to China. And in the last few years, China and the U.S. both committed to build high-speed rail networks. But starting in 2010, the U.S. chose the path of fiscal austerity, while China created jobs through public investment. Today, the U.S. has not a single mile of high-speed rail, while China's high-speed rail system carries as many passengers as the entire domestic U.S. airline system. Today in the U.S., 5 years after the financial sector meltdown, corporate profits are up, the stock market is way up, and the median family income is down 4%. And just last week, a New York Times article explained how big corporations are adjusting their business models to a nation in which the middle class is disappearing. Now, that's not a recipe for convincing the Main Street American public to support more big changes that affect the whole economy. See, brothers and sisters, the challenge of climate change can only be solved when we find a formula based on clean energy that also meets the real needs of regular people in their everyday lives. Our need for decent work and pay, for access to energy and water, for healthy communities, food security, and so much more. It's not good enough to simply call for an end to carbon emissions. We have a responsibility to think carefully about how to actually make change. And I'm here to say that the discussion must begin with dialogue and negotiation with those whose lives and communities, health care and pensions are all bound up with carbon-based fuels. Simply demanding that plants and industries and projects be stopped and shut down, I got to tell you, that poisons the well politically. People who want to stop climate change must engage with the people whose lives and livelihoods are at stake here and now, and we must join together for positive, job-creating approaches, or we will all fail. Now, real leadership means finding tens of billions of real dollars for both investment and just transition. The alternative is the continued politics of stalemate and inaction. Now, just consider one example. The main pension for retired coal miners, covering over 100,000 people, needs an additional $2 billion to meet its obligation. Now, any workable, equitable path forward on climate must include making sure those miners and their families get what they've earned through a lifetime of backbreaking and dangerous work. Now, $2 billion sounds like a lot of money, but think about it this way. It is literally less than the increase in a billionaire's wealth for the year 2013. One billionaire made more in 2013 than $2 billion. Now, so it's not a question of what we can and cannot afford to do as a society. This is a question about what we choose to do or not do. Now, I know my friends from the environmental movement here agree because of the tremendous support, I mean tremendous support, that the environmental community gave to the fight to hold Patriot Coal and Peabody Coal and Arch Coal to the promises that they made to the men and women who made them rich. As someone who began his working life in a coal mine, that support means the world to me personally. And I want to thank you on behalf of coal miners everywhere who spent their working lives in hard and dangerous work and today struggle to maintain their health care and their modest retirement. But the fight has just begun. And wrapped up in it is the question of whether we can, as a nation, as a democracy, take on the threat of climate change. Because, my friends, it doesn't have to be this way. There are alternatives to injustice and to tragedy. There are many, many pro-job and pro-environment investment that can take us down the path to a cleaner, more prosperous future. And together we can make them a reality. You see, our nation has the technology to reduce methane leaks in our national gas system and to create good, family-supporting jobs doing it. And that's why the AFL-CIO and the BlueGreen Alliance have formed a partnership called Repairing America's Aging Pipelines, RECAP, to do the work on the ground to get these programs moving. And we need more ideas like this, more ideas that can create jobs and make our economy more competitive and fight climate change at the same time. We have the technology to reduce building emissions by up to 1/2 and to put millions of people to work in the process. At the AFL-CIO, we're completing a retrofit of our headquarters. And I'm proud to say it will make our building the greenest in the city, financed by the pension fund of working men and women of the electrical workers. You see, there's no reason other than the dysfunction of our financial system that we can't retrofit every large building in America. But as much progress as we can make in the United States, the reality is that our climate is a global public concern. And moving emissions from one country to another doesn't help us clean up. Now, I know a lot of people in this room have focused these last few weeks on fighting for a new trade model and fighting to stop yet another fast track to more NAFTA-style trade deals. And I know many people in this room are aware that language in the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement threatens to undermine our ability to protect the environment in our country and globally. But I got to tell you, the stakes are even higher than that. You see, while we have much to do in the United States, the reality is that our economy is far more efficient in the ways that we produce goods and services than many of our major trading partners. For example, we run our largest trade deficit with China. China emits more than 4 times as much global warming pollution per dollar of output as we do. And that means if we make carbon-based energy expensive in the United States, but have no trade rules that regulate the carbon intensity of our imports, all we'll do is drive our industry to countries like China. And the net result will be not just job loss in the U.S., but higher net global emissions. So how can we possibly enter into trade agreements like the TPP or the bilateral investment treaty with China that do nothing to discipline carbon emissions? Why is the trade representative not pulling on the same end of the rope as the rest of the U.S. government? Why is the trade representative negotiating an environmental chapter that doesn't address our biggest environmental threat? And why is the U.S. trade representative not a participant in the interagency group on climate? And why are we negotiating more trade agreements with inadequate labor rights language and special legal rights for corporations? See, more NAFTAs will only erode the public's confidence in our government, making meaningful action on climate more and more difficult. See, brothers and sisters, we often talk about climate deniers. But today, we are effectively denying climate change exists with the way the rules of the global economy are being written. Together, the labor and the environmental movements must demand a new trade model, a trade model that fights climate change. Instead of the false promise that we can outsource our carbon emissions, we need a comprehensive approach to stopping climate change across the economy, across the world economy, an approach that puts us on the right path on climate, on jobs, and on energy. And we need to think big, because the problems are big. We must act based on a clear understanding of how the politics and the economics of climate change interact with the politics and the economics of a world that is now, in truth, in its 7th year of economic crisis. Now, the obstacles to effective action to stop runaway climate change are not scientific and they are not technical. They are political. The obstacles to action can be found in the myth that there's no such thing as climate change, in the delusion that in a democratic society, elites can make working people bear all the costs of changes. And finally, in the myth that it is possible to do anything about carbon change if there are no border adjustments in our trade agreements. You see, we can overcome these obstacles. Government can make private actors internalize externalities by putting a price on carbon. And government can prime the technology pump by investing in innovation. Or our government can do nothing, and nothing will happen. You see, I'm here on behalf of the labor movement to tell you that we remain committed to the task of stopping runaway climate change. And that's not easy for us. For millions of workers in the U.S., our livelihoods, our families, our communities are at stake, not decades from now, but right now. You see, we need to act together to find common ground, to make the kind of effort we once made to win world wars, to find solutions to speak to the hopes and the aspirations of working and middle-class Americans. And we must shed the illusion that some other path will work. You see, the Blue-Green Alliance is about finding that common ground, about thinking big, about fighting unemployment, and about fighting climate change. And I am pleased and I am honored to be on this path with you, because there is no other path to prosperity for us, for our children, and for our grandchildren. It is up to us, and it is up to us to act now. I look forward to the fight, standing by your side to create an economy that really does create a working and middle-class climate and gives us justice, fairness, air that we can breathe, and an environment that we can pass on to generations to come. Keep up the fight.
Thank you very much, President Trumka. We appreciate your being here with us and the leadership you're giving our country. Now, utility workers are at the forefront of emergency responses, and when Hurricane Sandy hit the East Coast in 2012, utility workers from all over the country worked night and day to restore power to millions of people. To introduce our panel on America's infrastructure deficit, we wanted to share with you the voices of the workers who see that need every day.
The last encounter we've had with Hurricane Sandy, a lot of my members came and did what they do, which is be utility workers and respond. A lot of them left their homes. A lot of them had damage in the areas of Rockaway, Howard Beach, Staten Island. A lot of them came in, worked 12-hour shifts, 16-hour shifts, as their families were losing their homes.
I had the honor of going out to New York for Storm Sandy. People's Gas sent us out there along with our union, Local 18007, and to say the least, it was extreme out there. The first thing we saw was destroyed homes. There was a lot of safety issues. Broken glass, vehicles all over the streets, broken mains, broken meters.
Saw a lot of power lines down, a lot of trees down, a lot of wire down.
There was workers in substations in Lower East Side of Manhattan that blew up. They were flooded in powerhouses. They were there trying to do their best they can as workers to make sure that the people in New York City and Westchester had lights and power. If they needed heat or anything else, they were there for them. We can no longer keep having a system that's a shoestring system or a system of, I'll repair it when it breaks.
Equipment we have is old, it's worn out, it's broken. Now, whenever the weather gets bad, it stresses the equipment and it has more of a tendency to fail.
We have aging poles. There's been poles that we've been replacing that have been standing there since 1930.
A lot of distribution lines are really in sad shape just because they've been left alone for so long.
We need to invest in a system that is at least reliable and making sure that it's not just reliable, but safe for the public and safe for my workers that are out on the street. If we keep working and working to make that investment in it, we're going to have a better area to work in and a better environment for all of us.
Thank you to the utility workers. Up next, we have our panel that will focus on the need to repair America and the economic and environmental benefits of repairing our nation's infrastructure systems from energy transmission and water to transportation and communications. Moderating the panel and introducing our guests will be Dan Carroll. Dan is the Director of Multi-State Initiatives for Governor John Kitzhaber of Oregon. This first-in-the-nation position was created to advance job creation, clean energy, and infrastructure through innovative partnerships, including the West Coast Infrastructure Exchange. Prior to joining Governor Kitzhaber's office, Dan was Senior Fellow for Innovation and Clean Economy at the New Policy Institute in Washington, D.C., where he focused on new strategies to accelerate community-based job creation. Please join me in welcoming our panel and Dan Carroll. Dan?
Thanks, Dave. Thank you. Thank you. Well, welcome everyone. We've assembled a great panel to start digging into the infrastructure issue today. I'm Dan Carroll, your friendly moderator. Had way too nice of an introduction from Dave Foster. I want to quickly introduce the panel. Francis Beinecke, the president of the NRDC. Greg DiLoretto, the past president of the American Society of Civil Engineers. Mike Langford, the national president of the National Utility Workers Union. And Ralph LaRosa, the president of New Jersey's largest utility, public service, electric and gas. This is the first of two plenary panels today on the infrastructure issue, and what we're going to try to do is try to unpack some of the issues and details of this multi-trillion-dollar challenge into some digestible chunks. Because it's early and it's Monday and maybe your coffee is just kicking in, we're going to try to talk about, and we're talking about infrastructure, which sometimes is not the sexiest topic out there. I thought it would try to help you give a heads up by trying to flag some of the early takeaways to look for today. And at the same time, during the panel, we'll throw out the names of some cool websites. So if you're live blogging mode or at hashtag Repair America, we can give you a head start on getting some content out to your folks. So quickly, takeaway number one. There's no silver bullet out there for fixing the infrastructure problem. No single green bank, clean bank, infrastructure bank, PPP, or Wall Street wizard is going to do it like magic. We need to build a new system, and we need to build it together. Second takeaway, there's different types of infrastructure, and they have different types of challenges and different business models. Water, wastewater, energy generation, transmission, ports, roads, transit all work a little bit differently. And they get paid for a little bit differently, so we need to think and act accordingly, and our panelists will address a lot of the different individual sectors. Lastly, and maybe this is a takeaway, maybe it's a debating point, but we've actually been a little bit better than you might think on building certain types of new infrastructure. Where we've been really lousy is in maintaining it And most importantly, as we look forward to the challenges of climate change, figuring out how we're going to make that infrastructure resilient is a huge, huge challenge. So let's dig in. Greg DiLoretto, I want to go to you first. Greg is the president, as I said, of the American Society of Civil Engineer, and our first little web throw out, infrastructurereportcard.org is the report card that the ASCE often puts out with some kind of depressing grades. Reminds me of my teenager sometimes and his grades. Greg, tell us a little bit about the challenge on infrastructure.
Well, thank you. Well, since 1998, ASCE has been putting out a report card on the condition of America's infrastructure. We do it every 4 years. It's a snapshot in time to tell us how we're doing as a nation on the condition of our infrastructure. It covers 16 categories of infrastructure: road, bridges, electrical, parks, schools, and so forth. Our latest report card that came out just about a year ago now gave our nation a grade of D+ for our infrastructure overall. That's up slightly from the D that we got in 2009. But I know, you got to be happy about that. We're improving. But what we found was where we invested in infrastructure, the grades went up. Now, we also found out what happens if we don't make these investments. And we saw that if by 2020 we don't make about $3.6 trillion we believe is necessary to bring our infrastructure to a grade of B, if we fail to make that investment, we will see a loss in 2020 alone of 3.5 million jobs in that year alone at all levels. We'll see a loss of $3,100 per American household per year if we don't make that investment. We'll see a loss in our GDP equal to France's GDP in 2011 if we don't make that investment. So the point that we're trying to point out is that if we want to enjoy the economic prosperity that we always have and the quality of life we've enjoyed, we're going to need to make these investments in our infrastructure.
Thank you. So Francis Beinecke, here comes the climate crisis, here comes NRDC. How are you guys looking at the challenges of climate and engaging around the infrastructure question?
Well, I think first of all, there's no question that the climate is changing, and just in the last year, some parts of the United States have been the hottest ever recorded, some places have been the driest ever recorded. I think everyone here is very familiar with the very, very serious drought in California right now, and some places have been the wettest ever recorded. So I think what's happening, and it's very clear, it's not from models, it's from actual experience, the climate is changing. It's changing more rapidly than the scientific community had projected originally, but they're seeing the changes. So as we plan for infrastructure, we have to plan for a very different future. We have to make the infrastructure resilient. We have to project what happens when it's hotter, drier, wetter, and I would just say from this winter's experience, colder in many places as well. And we have to prepare for that. So, if you look at Hurricane Sandy in New York, which was devastating, New York has projected a $20 billion investment to make the city resilient, and that's only one city in America.
Mike Lankford, let's go to Sandy. So your members were on the front lines of Sandy, experienced, hopefully we're not going to have more of them, but in all likelihood we are. What's been the perspective of your members, how the human capital challenges, and how you guys are engaging on this issue?
Well, as many of you just saw the video with post-Sandy, and Sandy really highlighted and brought out what the vulnerabilities of the utility industry really is out there, be it gas, be it electric, or water, and wastewater. I mean, they're all subject to severe, disasters, basically, when these weather conditions are such as Sandy. And Sandy really highlighted it again, but if you really look, there's been a lot since Sandy. In Michigan, anybody from Michigan suffered through that ice storm of 500,000 people? A couple days before Christmas, it was a 9-day outage. And you look at here just now, there's still people without power in Pennsylvania and Maryland, which there's crews from all around the country going to repair these places, outages lasting multiple days. So, yeah, Sandy brought the awareness. Our folks, as you can see, are first responders. They're down in the trenches, the women and men who make up utility workers. They put their lives on the job every day. And they know what these infrastructures are built like because they have to work down in them. So, yes, we need to repair them. You heard that it's rated at a D+. I don't think all of it is. I think some of it's still at a D-. And for instance, we're talking about natural disasters, but there's also man-made disasters. A lot of you probably saw in Charleston, West Virginia, that chemical spill. Well, the water plant there, American Water, who produces the fresh drinking water for people, their facility took in that contaminant. Well, their facility loses 37.5% of the water that they produce. Can you imagine that? 37.5% of the product that you make goes right out into the ground or into the wastewater systems. And you heard California's in a severe drought. Well, I bet they'd like that 37.5% water right now. Because if you think about it, we lose 7 billion gallons of fresh water all the time. I mean, that's a tremendous amount of water. The grid system, I've said it before, where the Chinese have built transmission lines, where their voltage drop over a 1,200-mile radius is like 7%. Ours, with that same line, would be 80% over that same distance with what we have. They have 1,000,000 kW. We have 765 as our highest. So you see, there's some things that can change that we can force to happen by making people get engaged, not making people, but getting people engaged with the process here to go to their politicians, go to their communities, go to their public service commissions to really drive home the message that this is just not sustainable to what we're dealing with here, and that we have to make a change. And that's why you've heard the earlier speakers talk about Repair America, RECAP. The amount of methane that comes out of leaking gas pipes, natural gas, that methane is 10 to 12 times worse than carbon dioxide. It equates to about 120 million automobiles, just due to the fact of leaky pipes. Look how many jobs we can put back. People working, good jobs. So you can see there's a tremendous amount of work. Our folks are on the front lines. We're not giving up. We're a part of this campaign of Repair America. We're not going to back down. We're not going to slow down. I don't care what trade agreements they're throwing at us. We have to fight against all those, like Rich Trumka said. But we have to even the playing field. We need to work with the utilities across the country. We need to work with the legislators across the country, the public service commissioners, the environmentalists, to all come together for a common goal, is to rebuild our gas, electric, and water and wastewater systems, because they really are at the end of their useful life. And we can't allow that.
Thanks, Mike. So Ralph, let's start teeing up some solutions. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the Energy Strong program that your company's involved in?
Yeah, sure. Energy Strong is our response to Sandy, and we've really focused on rebuilding our infrastructure and the electric grid. But let me just take a little bit of a step back. I mean, I agree with everything that was said here. And if we can all get on the same page and get on the same train and go convince people that this makes sense, this is a no-brainer. We got old stuff, the weather's changing, we got a lot of people that want to help fix it. So, you know, if I just step back a little bit, I had the opportunity to not only live through Sandy in an operations role, but I also lived through the 2003 blackout. And if you recall back then in the Northeast, one tree took down the entire grid. I mean, what does that tell you about the infrastructure and how fragile it is? But I would tell you that FERC stepped up and did the right thing. FERC put incentives in place that brought investors to the table. Utilities like us were able to invest. So what we've done in New Jersey, and now we're trying to replicate it with Energy Strong, is we made investments just last year over $1.9 billion. $1.9 billion in New Jersey on transmission, because the FERC sent clear signals that they wanted the system rebuilt, they wanted it rebuilt the right way, and they wanted to use new technology. So we've stepped up and done it. Investors are looking to make that investment. We'll solve some of the issues that we have as far as building infrastructure for the new weather. We'll have it new, and we're going to put a ton of people to work. We just have to replicate that model that was put in place in 2003 in each one of the states, and there's no more powerful voice to make that happen than the three that we just heard here.
Excellent, excellent. So Greg, let's talk a little bit about transportation and transit. The AFL-CIO and labor partners recently funded an effort, and a number of governors, bipartisan, 17 governors, including, surprisingly, mine, signed a letter calling for rapid funding of the Highway Trust Fund. So on transportation, transit, you want to touch on that a little bit?
Well, transportation, particularly roads and bridges, grades rose in the last report card. Roads rose to a grade of D, mainly because of stimulus funding. We did a lot of paving projects with the stimulus money, but it's gone. And so we're not seeing that. Bridges went to a grade of C+ because the cities, the counties, and the states all got together and pooled their money to try to fix our bridges. But we still have 1 in 9 are structurally deficient. And we estimate it would take about $8 billion a year through 2020 to get those bridges, to get that category erased, to get that backlog. The fact is that 40% of America's urban highways are congested, and Americans waste about 2 billion gallons of gas a year sitting in traffic. At $3 to $3.50 a gallon, that's about $7 billion we're wasting. We're spending it, we're not getting anything for it. But we have a worse problem facing us right now. It's estimated by the end of this fiscal year, the Federal Highway Trust Fund will be bankrupt. And that means a reduction to states of some to 92%, some people say it's 100% reduction in federal money to our states for transportation projects. Most states get about half of their transportation money from the federal government. This is both transit as well as roads. So you can imagine what's going to happen to your state if it's already, and all of them are, underfunded in terms of road conditions. Already, state DOT directors are not obligating new projects. We went through this last time when MAP 21 came out. They stopped obligating new projects because they didn't know if there was going to be any federal money to pay for them. They've already stopped doing that. It's estimated that right now, we need a 10-cent increase in the gas tax. Right now, right today, if we're going to continue at the level of funding. And we are not improving the condition of our transportation system. Transit got a grade of D. It didn't change over the last 4 years. And in transit's case, over 45% of Americans in urban areas do not have access to transit. Those that do are increasing their ridership. But our bus systems are not being replaced. Our transit systems aren't being replaced. And so the grade doesn't go up. Again, it affects our economic prosperity and our quality of life. And all of us, and not in this room, but every American has to commit that an infrastructure is important to their quality of life.
Thanks. So, Francis, President Trumka noted that AFL-CIO is retooling their headquarters, so shifting over to the energy efficiency issue. We all know that energy not used is probably the cheapest way to attack some of our energy and climate challenges. Tell us about the new NRDC effort to work with cities around the country.
Well, we've just rolled out an effort called the Clean Energy Project with 10 cities across America: Atlanta, Denver, Salt Lake City, Philadelphia, Chicago, Kansas City, and others. The purpose is really to work with the mayors, and I think the mayors are a really important center of leadership in this country to design how to make their commercial building sector as energy efficient as possible and how to make it as resilient as possible. So this is investing in our communities in a smart, sustainable way, both to save money, to save energy, and to make the buildings resilient. And it's very exciting actually to work in cities all across the country because I think it will pave the way for more and more cities. We've worked in New York, we've worked in Los Angeles. These are 10 more cities, and this project, which is just 10 cities, will save the consumer $1 billion a year in energy costs. So we're making them smarter, we're making them less expensive, and we're making them more resilient for a clean energy future that has a very grave climate challenge. It's very exciting, and we're very happy to be part of it.
Right, and these are very investable projects, which brings us to our second web round. So ullico.com, ULLICO.com. It's a labor pension fund investor that's already investing in infrastructure solutions around the country. Mike, to you were telling us when we were prepping for the panel about some interesting stuff going on in Illinois that was pretty exciting in terms of infrastructure innovation.
Yeah, and I mean, when we talk about this, there is some success stories out there. And I'd like to just comment the fact that the state of Illinois last year, we were able to partner up. I mean, the BlueGreen did a lot of the other labor unions within the state, the governor, business, People's Gas, Integris, all partnered up to get some legislation passed to actually rebuild the gas infrastructure in the state. And in the process, we're getting veterans coming back and putting them back to work in good, sustainable living wage jobs within the utility workers, rebuilding that infrastructure. So that's a huge success story. We're supporting the Energy Strong in New Jersey with Ralph and his company, and these are the types of things that we really need to go state by state and turn that into a success story to emulate what's happening in Illinois.
That's great. That's great. So we all know, Ralph, about the natural gas supply revolution. We know that it has great potential as a critical transition fuel on climate. But we also know We have lots and lots of pipelines, and as Mike brought up, the methane issue is huge. You want to paint a little picture on the scale of this challenge for us?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you just look at our utility. We have the largest footprint of cast iron in the country, just in New Jersey. So it's a constant challenge for us. And as Mike said, we're trying to work together with all of our union partners to find a way to replace more of that. But it really gets down to the consumer. What is the consumer willing to bear? If you look at the percentage of disposable income that's been used that is used on utilities by consumers, it has not changed over the past 50 years. It's been relatively flat. So what we'll have to figure out as a society is how much more are we willing to put in. Infrastructure is core to what we do. As individuals, as humans, we need to get around, we need to be able to turn the lights on. That's what's really changed for us. We want to use less electricity. We're out there spending lots of money with Mike's folks and a lot of other folks trying to find ways to deploy energy efficiency solutions. We're constantly doing that as a utility, but nevertheless, there's still, when people want their electricity, when they want their gas, when they want their water, they want it now and they want it to be secure. And we've got to find a way to balance those two pieces so we can make the investments and that we don't drive prices up for consumers too much.
Great. Greg DiLoretto, we're reading a lot about drought all over the place. We also know that on energy generation, water is a huge issue. So the water challenge is huge. Your day job is running a major water district in my state, Oregon. What are you working on, or what's happening in our region that might be helpful for others to know about?
Sure. Well, and there's no question that water supply and energy supply are two big issues facing the economic prosperity of our country. The area that I come from, the Portland area, we are blessed to have multiple water sources. But the fact is, and I've noticed this with my colleagues that run water utilities around the country, the per capita use of water anyway has dropped over the last several years. And in fact, in my utility, amazingly enough, we're using less water now per capita than we did in the 1960s. We've gone back in time. Now, we've a number of programs throughout the country, both in electric and water, about water. We call it water conservation. I call it wise water use, such that customers understand what's the best way to use water. And so you go to various parts of the country. Las Vegas pays you to tear out your grass, so we're not watering lawns anymore. My part of the world, we had a number of wise water usages. But that doesn't eliminate the need for more water. And so the fact is, we're in the process of $1 billion water expansion for our area. But these things take decades to build. By the time you go through the planning process, by the time you do the permitting process, by the time you do the design and construction, they can take decades. More to the point that Francis made, though, we're trying to train our engineers in how they do these projects differently. So part of the work we do is on resiliency. We're not going to design them the way we used to in the old days. We're trying to make them resilient. The other part is on sustainability. And to that end, AFL-CIO, together with the American Public Works Association and the American Consulting Engineers Council, has created the Institute for Sustainable Infrastructure. And it provides us as designers with tools, more like a LEED-like based tool, if you're familiar with leadership and energy and design, more like that type of tool, so that we can start designing these projects so that they meet the triple bottom line of the environment, of society, and economics. And that's helping us to build better projects in the future.
Thank you. And thank you for queuing up the third little web commercial here. The Water Utility Climate Alliance. It's kind of a clunky WUCAonline.org, WUCAonline.org. But along with ISI is a group of water utilities around the country that are trying to address the climate thing. Mike, I'm going to go to you a second and talk about some of the water horror stories that we see out there. My governor likes to say a lot that people moan and groan if their water bill goes from $30 to $35 a month, but they happily pay $150 a month for their Comcast bundle. Not that we don't want that kind of infrastructure for small business, et cetera, but goes to show how important it is also for mayors and governors to push and make clear how cheap and what an incredible benefit clean water is and wastewater is, et cetera. So as you guys deal with these issues, what are some of the horror stories that you're seeing out there in terms of maintenance?
Well, I mean, you heard the Charleston, West Virginia. I mean, that was just one example. But again, when you are losing that amount of water, 7 billion gallons, there's a lot of room for improvement. And that's what I said when I was talking about systems. Really, water and wastewater is at its end of its useful life. They're in flood-prone zones that need to be rebuilt completely. And we really need, I mean, we're putting a lot of emphasis on natural gas due to the methane, but we really need to put just as much emphasis on the whole water infrastructure also, because it is probably still at a D minus, I'm assuming. It's a D. It picked up a half. Okay, so but it's in bad shape, and we have to bring it to people's attention to demand better, because it takes water to sustain life.
Francis, resilience, resilience, resilience. It's a word that we're hearing more and more about how to think about infrastructure systems and how to design them. Can you share with us some of the different design considerations and issues around this?
So just take an example, sea level rise. Sea level rise is happening. It's happening all across the country, all across the world. That means you have to build things higher, and you have to put building infrastructure higher up in the building. One of the consequences of Sandy was New York University Hospital had to close. Not only did they have to evacuate the whole hospital, they lost years of research because their database and their experiments were flooded. And they had planned for a 9-foot surge, except the surge was 12 feet. So really understanding where the trends are, putting things up, both using green infrastructure to create softer barriers, which is happening in Philadelphia, New York, and other cities, but also figuring out how to fortify the parts of the cities that you cannot use green infrastructure in. So, thinking through, and I think Greg made this point, thinking through what are the changes that are going to happen, how to prepare for them, designing differently for that. And that is going to be evolving, because really we can't project what's going to happen 50 to 100 years from now, but we're actually building for a 30 or 40-year cycle in infrastructure. So that creates a tremendous challenge for the designers, and it means we have to both have continuing learning and put flexibility into the ongoing design requirements, because in many ways we're learning on the job. Speaking of water, 11 billion gallons of sewage flooded into the New York waterways after Sandy. 11 billion, because every sewage treatment plant overflowed. EPA estimated that we need $300 billion investment in our water treatment systems, both in the sewage treatment systems and stormwater runoff, and in how we manage these systems. So, I'm sure we all look at that as a tremendous opportunity. We want that $300 billion invested to create jobs and to improve the quality in the environment, and we have to work together to make that happen and work together to figure out how we make our systems as resilient as we can going forward.
So our Energy Strong program absolutely addresses exactly this. So we'll just take Hoboken, the city of Hoboken, which is a microcosm.
Which is very much in the news these days.
For other reasons, but it's been a microcosm
I was going to make
of what happened. Yeah, I'll say what. If you just really step back, we had the electric grid was completely underwater. So all the substations in Hoboken were underwater. The gas mains were flooded because there were low-pressure cast iron gas mains where you had water infiltration. And then within a week of that, because of the type of structure that's underneath a lot of the pipes in that city, it's a very, it's a tidal area, we started to see a number of water main breaks. In addition to that, we had the wastewater issue. So that one little area saw every bit of it. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to replace a lot of the cast iron. We're trying to rebuild some of the water companies, trying to rebuild some of the infrastructure. But at the end of the day, we still get pushback. We've been at this Energy Strong program, a $2.6 billion 5-year program that we proposed to the state of New Jersey a year and a couple months ago. And we still get pushback. We get pushback because folks don't want to see any increase in the rates. And the best thing that I can tell everybody in this room is get together, do what Mike is doing. We're working with environmental partners, we're working with engineers, but most importantly, we're working with our unions. And they're all walking into those hearings with the PSC in New Jersey and saying, we need this. It's the right thing to do, and it's the right time to do it. Don't forget, commodity prices have come down. Commodity prices have come down because of the natural gas revolution and the impact not only on natural gas itself, but also on the electric grid and the price to generate. So you got a great opportunity now to rebuild this infrastructure, and it'd be a real shame for us to miss it.
Ralph, I want to stay with this a little bit because, we're at the BlueGreen conference, labor and environment, and what colors business, what colors utility, and in general, most people don't wake up in the morning going, I love my utility, I want to push for more rates. But if you think about the economic competitiveness frame, you think of the job creation frame, And for some of these things, water and electricity, pretty good deal. The whole issue of how do we get more people getting the business voice lifted up, I think, is important. Quick commercial, number 4, there's something called Infrastructure Week 2014. InfrastructureWeek2014.com. It's going to be happening in DC the week of May 12th. And you have the Council on Competitiveness, U.S. Chamber of Commerce, labor partners, and others coming together to raise the profile on infrastructure. So back to you, Ralph. Tell us a little bit more of what it takes to raise rates and how utility commissions work, because I think a lot of people have a vague idea and how you make profits, all that sort of stuff, because I think it's an important thing for people to understand.
Well, from a utility perspective, it's pretty simple. Utilities make an investment, we earn a return on that investment, just like a bank. So if we were to borrow money for the infrastructure, we earn a return on that, but only for half of it. The other half is funded by debt, and it's just to pay back to bondholders. And right now, a utility like ours can pretty much borrow that debt at just about the same rates that the U.S. Treasury is, a little bit above that. So it's a great time. Again, interest rates were low, they can remain low. So it's a great time for half of that. So if I spend $1, 50 cents of it I borrow that way. The other 50 cents I borrow from a shareholder. And that shareholder is expecting a return. And those rates have gone up and down over the last few years, somewhere between 8 and 11%. But if you want investors to flock to this industry, you put the right rates out there like the FERC has done. And as a result, we've seen the investors come to the table. Then we get together with the partners like we have here. And we just go to the PSC and we say, look, now's the right time. We'll raise the rates to whatever level you feel comfortable with in this state, and we'll set the infrastructure spend that supports that. And then what does that wind up doing? Well, we've put hundreds of more workers, IBW workers, to work in New Jersey rebuilding the transmission infrastructure. Why? We had a clear path. We understood the methodology and how we were going to get the return, and we were able to put those people to work. Not only do we do that, but working with Mike's union and a number of other unions, we've extended our contracts. We don't even sit there and argue across the table anymore. There's certainty among all of us as to how we're going to be working, and it makes life a lot simpler for everybody. We just go ahead, we replace the infrastructure, the ratepayers know what the rates are going to be, the regulators see the path, and the more that we do that, like was done in Illinois, and we replicate that model across in New Jersey, with Energy Strong, but across the country, the better it's going to be for all of us.
Greg, and then Francis.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on that because I ran a publicly owned utility different than a investor-owned utility. So there's another group that you have to keep in mind, and that these publicly owned utilities answer directly to the city council, or in my case, a special district. And we don't go to we do not go to a PUC. So you have an obligation, and I don't see this happening, and I never saw it when I worked, of going and talking to your city council. We're going to talk to the special service district that provides your water and sewer rates, or in some cases in Washington, even your power, and talking to them about this investment that's needed in rates. I would raise water rates every single year, at least by inflation. And I worked with all my customers, and we serve some 200,000 customers in that area. And I never had pushback on rate increases because I talked to them about, number one, how we were spending every dollar they gave us effectively, and number two, what they were going to get with the increased water rate. And I actually had, as an anecdote, I had a customer come in, a couple of them come in and go, we don't think you're raising them enough. We don't think you're doing enough in terms of the investment in this infrastructure. Now, it's rare, but I had that happen. To the second point, I had customers come to me one time and say, we had a water outage. I don't care what it costs. I want to make sure I have that water 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But you have to go out and talk to these city councilors about the importance that this has to your quality of life and your economy.
Francis?
So I mean, Ralph's exactly right. People are very concerned about rates, but that's why the efficiency investment is so valuable. So we need a system that is clean, reliable, and affordable. NRDC's just started a project on affordable housing to make affordable housing much more energy efficient, so the consumer actually can actually keep their costs down, even as we make the investments that we have to make.
And the right way to do that is to somewhat decouple the actual payment to the utility from the throughput. Because if you just listen to what was said here, rates are set based upon, even if you keep them at inflation, and we want to pay everybody at inflation, same raises for everybody across the board at inflation levels. So if that's just going up normally, and you have usage coming down, the utilities don't take in enough money to actually cover that cost. So the way you do that is you break that cycle. In the past, the usage was going up, rates were going up, it was a nice model. Now, if we just want to replace the infrastructure at the same rate at which we had put it in, we need to split those two forces.
Absolutely.
And I would add, as everyone looks at how do we build this challenge together and everyone raise their game in terms of dealing with climate resilience, in terms of the kind of engagement, in terms of the kind of leadership that Mike and his union have shown. On the government side, what we're increasingly seeing is the importance of doing life cycle cost analysis and looking at these public assets as something that has 30, 40, 50-year life, as opposed to just the capital costs. We'll worry about the maintenance later. I'll throw two more websites onto the pile as we're in wrap-up mode just about. One is westcoastinfrastructure.org. It's the 3 governors on the West Coast trying to build pilot projects that are taxpayer smart and climate friendly and do this new life cycle cost analysis, so you can check that out. And then a second thing I would put out is we look at the issue of how do you get private capital in. If you're going to do a smart PPP, you'll hear this term public-private partnership out there. Where we've been really impressed is in Canada, they keep it 100% publicly owned, but they look at ways to partner with the private sector. And particularly in British Columbia, we've been copying a lot of homework with them. Partnershipsbc.ca, partnershipsbc.ca. I think there's a lot of interesting practice there. I'm going to do a quick 20-second wrap-up from everyone. The one thing you want this audience to do when they go home. We'll start with Mike.
Well, just in closing, we've talked a lot about the infrastructure, but another part of the infrastructure that we sometimes often forget, especially as we're going to a less carbon type energy system, is the stranded workers and the stranded communities that we deal with out there. And we're proposing, again, it goes back to financing, some sort of wires charge to really transition workers who are getting left behind because of the closing of coal plants or nuke plants, whatever it may be. But not only those workers, but everybody, the ancillary workers that are connected to that, building trades in the outage type situations, and also the communities who gain from the tax bases there are losing out. So we really need to look at how do we remanufacture different types of clean energy in these communities and also transition those workers. So that's my spiel in closing. We need to think about that and look at ways on how to finance that. And a wires charge, that's the cash register, right, Ralph?
That's right.
Of the utilities. So that's where we really need to focus on.
Ralph, your closing spiel?
Read up on FERC, what FERC did back in 2003. Read a little bit about what was done in Illinois in the last year or two. And then work together with your companies and with your suppliers and your environmental communities to bring this message forward. It's a good story. It's an easy story to tell, and it's a tough one to argue with.
Greg?
Yeah, just a couple of things. One, we said it, Mike said it, you've got to go out and talk to these elected officials, whether it's here in Washington, D.C., whether it's at the state, or whether it's in the community you live. You want to see change happen, that's where it's going to occur. The second thing, we talk about our report card on America's infrastructure. We talk about it as individual 16 categories, but the fact of the matter is this infrastructure works as one big thing. You can't have a great wastewater treatment plant system if you don't have a good electrical system, because wastewater treatment plants are some of the largest users of electricity. You can't have a great port system if you don't have an inland waterways to get the goods to port. So while it's great we're going to put money on individual infrastructure, it's got to work together. You got to make the entire investment.
Great. Francis?
Thank you. And what I would just say is that as we plan for our infrastructure future, which we have to do, and it has to be climate resilient, and I hope that all of you, having been here at the Blue-Green Alliance conference, will go out and really demand climate action and demand that our new infrastructure systems are clean, affordable, safe, and that they really provide for the American public in the future in a way that people expect. And that'll only happen if you raise your voices, because it's certainly not happening without them. Thank you.
With that, I'd like to invite everyone to applaud a great panel. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Dan Carroll, and thank you very much for the panel. That was a terrific discussion. And now to wrap up our morning program, I'm very pleased to introduce the daughter of a newspaper reporter and an elementary school teacher and granddaughter of an iron ore miner at U.S. Steel in northern Minnesota. Amy Klobuchar became the first woman elected to represent Minnesota in the U.S. Senate in 2006. Before becoming senator, she was county attorney in the largest county in Minnesota, and I might add, one of the first members of the associate membership program of the United Steelworkers. Senator Klobuchar has worked across party lines successfully to protect consumers and reform the rules of the Senate. The American Prospect named her as a woman to watch, and Working Mother magazine named her best in Congress for her efforts on behalf of working families. Since being elected, Senator Klobuchar has worked tirelessly to promote a fairer and cleaner economy, protect our natural resources, and she is one of the chief Senate co-sponsors of legislation to establish a national infrastructure bank. Always a champion of clean energy jobs, Senator Klobuchar is a good friend and my home senator. Please welcome Senator Amy Klobuchar.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Wow. All right. Well, I'm proud to be up here as a woman of steel. So thank you. That's what our associate member. And I also want to tell you, I just came back from Minnesota yesterday, and despite the reports, Minnesota is no longer colder than Mars. I don't know if you heard that, that Range Rover up there was at a particularly warm part of Mars, and one day, about 3 weeks ago, the temperature that registered from the Range Rover was actually warmer than International Falls, Minnesota. So, but we are out of that now. And I do bring you greetings from our state, where in the words of our poet laureate, Garrison Keillor, right? The women are strong, the men are good looking, and all the steelworkers are above average. All right, way above average. We have, I know that my friend Mr. Melander is out there, a great union leader in our state. I also just was meeting with Leo Gerard, who I adore. Not everyone can say they adore Leo Gerard, but I do. He's such an incredible leader, and it's so good to be here with my friend Dave Foster. And Dave mentioned a bit about my background, that my grandpa worked 1,500 feet underground in the mines his whole life. When the mine shut down, he became a logger, and it gave me a real sense of the ups and downs of this kind of work, but also a sense of the need for public policy that supports these kinds of jobs, whether it's Made in America provisions in the stimulus bill and the transportation bill, or whether it's standing by our workers on increasing the minimum wage and making sure that everyone's got an opportunity. Now, part of this, thank you, part of all this, which you guys get and why you're here today, is about energy policy and how we make it work and how we make it create jobs in our country and also make it better for the environment. So I like to look back at what's happened since I got to Washington. I shouldn't even say that. It hasn't been the best 7 years. But I think that you know that it's been a difficult time. There's been probably my lowest moment was actually New Year's Eve, not this year, but the year before, when we had that fiscal cliff night where we had to vote till 3 in the morning on New Year's Eve. And probably the lowest moment I remember, it was midnight, that magical moment, right, on New Year's Eve. And I look to my left, I see Harry Reid. I look to my right, I see Mitch McConnell, every girl's dream, okay, on New Year's Eve. That was maybe the lowest point. The second being the shutdown, that wasn't that great either, and we lost a lot of jobs and money. Although one effect of the shutdown, I'll get to this later, is I do think that it created some momentum to get the budget done, to move forward on some things, because the American people actually had just about had it. And I think that we're in a little different place, but not where we need to be, and so I'm going to talk about how we move forward. But before I do that, I kind of want to go back on energy policy to talk about what I think were our sort of moments where the bad road was taken. And the first, of course, was after 9/11. You remember the country was united, and President Bush, remember, went to New York, and he stood there at that site, and we were all embracing our country. And I remember at that time he told people, I don't remember what he told people to do. He told them to go shopping. Okay, that's okay. But I truly believe in my heart that we could have moved forward on energy at that moment, and transportation and energy. He could have so easily made that argument that, we're dependent on some of these countries that are sponsoring these terrorists, right? and we're dependent on them for foreign oil. And instead of investing in these cartels of the Mideast, we should be investing in the workers and the farmers of the Midwest. And that's how we move forward as a country. And I am just convinced if he had said that at the time, however he wanted to get there with funding it, that about 80% of the people in the country would have said, sign me up, I want to be part of this. It was one of those moments where people were united. But we all know that didn't happen at that moment. Okay, now let's move forward. Summer of 2008, I was in the Senate then, and we were working hard on a few things. One is some better efficiency standards. I called it building a fridge to the next century. You know, it's kind of hard to make energy jokes, okay? So we were working on these efficiency standards, and we got higher gas, higher gas mileage standards, which was a victory. And I still remember standing there at the press conference. This was Politics 101 for me about Washington, D.C. I'm standing there, and we are embracing and cheering on that we had gotten this bipartisan compromise done on the gas mileage standards. And I was brand new. It was my first press conference, and I was on the Commerce Committee. I am on it, and that's how we got the agreement. And so I get to the microphone. I go, well, you know what? It's been so long since we've increased the gas mileage standards. It hasn't happened since I was in junior high. And then the next senator went up to the microphone and said, I was there when we last increased the gas mileage standards. So that was the last time I did that on the Hill. But the point of it is that we got that done. That was a victory, but we fell one vote short. This was the next error after the Bush moment of passing a renewable electricity standard, which I always thought was a smart way to go in terms of creating incentives, as you'll see in a state like Minnesota, where with the Republican governor, Governor Plenary, and a bipartisan group in the House and the Senate, we were able to overwhelmingly pass one of the most aggressive renewable electricity standards in the country. And in fact, we have encouraged and incentivized so much more wind and solar. At the same time, our economy has actually gotten stronger, even through the downturn. Now, our unemployment rate's at 4.6% in Minnesota. Just to give you a sense of how you can have a strong, I meant it when I said the steelworkers were way above average, okay? You can have a strong renewable standard, and you can still have a strong economy. So I really viewed that as a failure on our part when we fell one vote short of breaking the filibuster. That was at a time where we could have gotten it done. Now, the third moment was actually when President Obama first came into office, you know, geared up in the middle of the downturn. You all remember it was like January of that year when he first took office. We had lost more jobs in this country than there were people in the state of Vermont, to get you a sense, and that's why we worked on the stimulus bill and moved a lot of things forward. But one of the things I think we could have done, and that he had said he wanted to do right when he got in, was again that renewable electricity standard. Because remember, we were only one vote short of breaking the filibuster, right? Only a year before, when our numbers were worse. And our numbers had improved of people that would support it. And then we also had the House. And I think we could have easily gotten that done at that time, and it would have been one of those long-term incentives that I think would have made a major difference for the country. We could have done it regionally with different standards for different regions, but instead we waited, remember, and we decided to go forward with cap and trade. Now, I supported that out of committee. And I think the seeds of the idea of using market forces to create those kinds of incentives were good. But as you all remember, in the middle of that downturn, there were some real issues expressed with how that would interact with the economy and the costs and other things. And it just basically died in the Senate after having passed the House and passed actually our environmental committee. So that's the sad story, where I think we had this amazing moment when Bush was in to do whatever we needed to do to become more energy independent and help the environment. I think we had another moment when we had that vote and we were so close. And then the third moment was when Obama first came in and we had the House and we could have moved on a renewable electricity standard and other things. So where does that take us now? Well, I think the next moment is now, right? It is in the next year. It is through this election, harder time to get things done, but then immediately after that, as we're starting to see people more and more concerned about environmental issues, with this incredible extreme weather we're seeing, with the hurricanes, with the drought in California, with concerns on the coast, concerns in the Midwest about tornadoes, and I just think you start to see a growing interest in the climate change issue. That coincides, of course, with your major focus, which is why I love the Blue-Green Alliance, on jobs, and we're already starting to see the positive effects of the new energy and jobs. So, as we look at Washington and we move forward from that lovely New Year's Eve I spent, reasons to see some glimmer of hope. One is we finally got a budget done. We replaced half the sequestration cuts. We have to do more there in terms of not using these hammers, which affect the lives of working people in very big ways. The second thing is that we got the Farm Bill done, which the president, I was there with him in Michigan on Friday when he signed that bill into law. And it also includes some major, major victories for renewable energy. And we finally fully fund the energy title. We were able to maintain the entire $880 million that was in the Senate version. I had an amendment with Senator Hoeven of North Dakota, Republican, that added $100 million more for energy. That also got included in the final bill. And the idea here is that we move forward only when we're willing to invest, like you've seen in some of these other countries. Anyone that flies over Germany and sees these solar panels, right, that workers installed and that people get better energy from on all these houses, they were willing to invest. Whether it's a seat cushion made from soybeans for a car manufactured in Detroit or new bio-based plastics that offset demand for foreign oil, we know that if we have the right policies in place, that clean manufacturing is going to create jobs, and not just on farms, but also in cities across America. Another reason I'm optimistic, this has stalled out for now, but the Shaheen-Portman energy bill, which was supported by the AFL-CIO and the Chamber of Commerce, doesn't happen all the time, and it's not like this is the panacea to everything, but at least these two strong senators came together, came up with some ideas to move forward on energy efficiency. As I said, it stalled out because of gridlock problems, but I'm almost sure it's going to come back and we can get this done. And so when I look at the budget, the Farm Bill, and the potential of moving hope forward on Shaheen-Portman, it's not everything, but it shows some forward momentum that we didn't have before. I see this idea of energy and what you're doing with the Blue-Green Alliance as really part of a competitive agenda for this country. It's a simple idea that we can't afford to be a country anymore that just makes its money by churning money on Wall Street. We tried that once, right? Didn't work that well. We respect our financial industry. It's an important part of our economy, but it can't be the basic foundation of our economy. The basic foundation of our economy has to be a country that makes stuff again, that invents things, and that exports to the world. That's the basic foundation of our economy, where we go from here. So what does this mean when it comes to the energy economy and it comes to jobs? Well, first of all, it means, and I know your last panel was talking about this, that we have to have a transportation network that's built for this century and the next century, not for the last century, right? If we want to move forward and be this economy that actually makes stuff and exports to the world instead of all the ships coming toward us, we want them to go that way. We have to have locks and dams that are upgraded and work. We have to have trains that work, that aren't exploding in the middle of North Dakota. We have to have a highway system that works and bridges, and no one knows this better than me. I live 6 blocks from that bridge that fell down in the middle of that summer's day in the middle of Minnesota. 8-lane highway, 6 blocks from the house. Highway that I bring my daughter over every single day. And I said that day, a bridge just shouldn't fall down in the middle of America. But you know when it does? We rebuilt it. And we got that thing done in less than a year in Minnesota. And as a result of that terrible tragedy and dozen people dying, 55 cars in the water of the Mississippi River, we really looked at all our bridges and found severe structural problems in our state and made some changes. And we were actually able on the statewide basis to get a gas tax increase to help fund some of those infrastructure changes because of what happened. According to the American Society of Civil Engineers, inefficiencies in infrastructure are expected to drive up the cost of doing business by an estimated $430 billion, and that's just in the next decade. One of the bills that you maybe have talked about today is this idea of an infrastructure bank, or as some call it, infrastructure financing. I'm one of the original co-sponsors of the bill. Senator Warner is leading the effort. It's a bipartisan bill. And it would serve as a complement to existing infrastructure funding. The idea is to leverage public and private funding to build major infrastructure projects. I'm also working with Commerce Secretary Pritzker and Secretary Kerry on reforming our export control system. That's something else that gets us to where we need to be with exports, which is allowing more things to be off this list that are banned as exports. You understand why you're not going to send fighter jet planes to certain countries, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't send nuts and bolts to countries. And as we look at this decrease in investment in some of our defense industries, we have to look at ways we can keep those jobs strong. And part of the way we keep those jobs strong is by exporting more and more things. And once again, it leads us back to the infrastructure and having the infrastructure in place. So I talk about infrastructure of immediate jobs when stuff is built, that's clear. But I also talk about infrastructure in terms of our whole economy as a way to get goods to market. And that's what, I know you do that as well, but it's really important as you look at the bigger need for these roads and bridges and for our locks and dams. Second part of the competitive agenda, which you can feel right here in this room, is investment in our workforce training. This is a simple idea of science, technology, engineering, and math coming back strong in our classrooms. I have another bill to double the number of STEM schools, again with Senator Hoeven of North Dakota. Minnesota and North Dakota, we share the cold and we get along well. But we have to try to have more kids go into science, technology, engineering, and math. I've been in some incredible schools. One of my favorite was class that was, because as you know, with the modern equipment that we have right now, it's really hard to have it in high schools. And that's why a lot of this is trying to work with the community colleges and the 1- and 2-year degree technical schools so these kids can get some of this training in high school so they won't just drop out of high school, so that they'll go into these fields or they'll go into them immediately after high school. And making it cool and understanding that manufacturing floors are no longer dark, dirty, and dangerous, that the world has changed and that manufacturing is a very, very positive career. I went to this one school in the suburbs of Minneapolis, and these kids were just so focused on making their project, which was an automatic pool ball sorter. So when the pool balls came in, they would automatically sort in the right way. And I remember it was very complicated, and they're all proud of this thing. And I finally said to them, "This is such a cool thing you guys have made. Do you think you could ever sell it?" And this kid goes, "Well, it's kind of a limited market." And I said, "Well, who would it go to?" And they said, "People who have everything." But the point of that story was not the automatic pool ball sorter. It was the fact that these kids were excited about science and technology and engineering and math. Of course, a piece of this is to make sure we increase the minimum wage, something that we are working very hard to do in the Senate. I held a hearing on the Joint Economic Committee with former Labor Secretary Robert Reich a few weeks ago, and the one number that came out in my mind that I will never forget is that the top 400 people in this country right now has the same amount of wealth as the whole bottom half of the country. Think about that. The top 400 have the same amount of wealth as the whole bottom half of the country. And as in Reich's movie, if you haven't seen it, it's really worth watching, a documentary. And he has a guy on, a CEO, has a lot of money, and the guy talks about how he buys jeans. And he says, "You know what, I'm really rich, but I really can only get like 2 or 3 pair of jeans a year. I have no need, no matter what I want, I only have that many jeans." And his point is, if people don't have enough money to buy jeans, the only way you can produce things in this country is if everyone has to buy at least 1 or 2 of them a year, whether it's a, whether it's a pair of shoes or a pair of jeans or any kind of gift they're going to get someone for the holidays. They have to be able to buy it when we're a 70% consumer-driven economy. And so I just think in my heart that increasing the minimum wage is not the only way out of this shrinking middle class, but it's a major part of it in addition to the training that we just talked about. And to get back on the training, they did a survey in our state, and in 2010, 40% of our manufacturers said that they had job openings that they didn't have people to fill with the exact skills. In 2012, it was up to 60%. And I don't blame the workers for this at all, right? I don't blame them at all. I blame our education system and the way we failed to invest and make clear what the needs are. And so I just see this as a part of the solution, not the only solution, but hooking people up with those right kind of degrees and getting them retrained and getting the kind of training they need to fill those jobs. Okay, the third last part of this competitive agenda is how going green can make our country more competitive. A group of more than 100 big companies, including Cargill, General Mills, Best Buy, 3M, they're all in my state, have created the Sustainability Consortium, and they're developing tools to measure and report on the sustainability of production across different countries and companies. Because one of the things that they're learning is the more energy efficient they are, the better they can compete. One example of this would be a little telephone company, because it's not just big guys, in Sebeka, Minnesota, and they realized that their customers were having real problems because they were in what part of our state which I would call extreme rural. And so when a big storm would come in and the energy went down, the power went down, they were in real trouble. They had no backups. So this telephone company decided to start selling sort of a solar wind turbine combination so that their customers could choose to buy that as backup. And they actually made a little business out of it, and we're doing pretty well. And they sold a bunch of them to farmers. And all of a sudden this one guy came in, he said, you know what, I love this thing so much, I decided I want to do my whole house in wind and solar, and I want you guys to come in and I'll pay you, I want you to do it. And they go, well, okay, sir, we'll do it. And it'll take like 10 years, though, for you to get the investment back. We just want you to know that if you're doing your whole house. It'll be worth it, but it'll take 10 years. He goes, no problem. They said, sir, do you mind if we ask you how old you are? Because you seem pretty old to be making this investment. He says, I'm 87, but I want to go green. And so I just think that the more people realize the long-term value of this, the more we're going to see it, but not if we just stay in the past. As we transition to the clean energy economy, and I think you know this, what the whole focus today is, we need to build wind turbines in Texas and not in Taipei. We need to build solar panels in Pennsylvania and not in Prague. And we need to build energy-efficient engines in Ohio and not in Okinawa. Those countries can build stuff, that's great, but we want to be building them here in America. According to the Department of Energy, over the last 7 years, global investment in the clean energy sector has grown fivefold to over $260 billion. And that's why I was one of 5 senators that sent a letter to the Department of Commerce Secretary in support of the Manufacturing Extension Partnership that has funded BlueGreen Alliance's Clean Energy Manufacturing Center. Because this is what we need to do. It's about labor, private industry working together to boost clean energy manufacturing. It's what made this country great when you look back in time when we partnered together, and this is our opportunity to do it now. So we know that energy innovation can't take root, not in any kind of a serious way, without certainty, stability, and a clean path forward. You in this room get this, and you know how frustrating it has been to have policies play red light, green light, wind energy investment stops because you don't know if the wind energy tax credit is going to be extended or not, and it happens year after year after year. But you also know that these policies can make a difference. So for me, I think what Congress needs to do is just sort of the boring work of making sure it's stable, as we've done with this last budget, but now we need to do it with the tax code. So we send these stable incentives to businesses. What we just did with the Farm Bill, those farmers now have a 5-year window. Some of it's in energy, but they have a 5-year window about knowing how to invest. We need to do the same with our other industries, right? With wind and solar and energy, and send that clear signal that we support this all or above energy approach, and that we're going to put our money where our mouth is and put those incentives in place to get it done. We need a comprehensive national blueprint for energy policy in this country, one that gives those incentives and makes it very clear the direction that we're going. Now, I want to end as I started. That's with my grandpa. I told you he was a miner and that he was a steel worker, and actually he worked in the mines for a very, very long time. He was 15 years old when his parents died, and he had 7 kids younger than him in his family, and he and his brother quit high school, and went to work in the mines. And they kept that whole family together. The little one had to go to an orphanage for a year, and then she came back. And that's how they raised that family, and they kept them together. And he would always dream, with that hard life, the joy that he would have would be hunting and fishing. And he would just dream of that all the time down in that mine, and picking blueberries. And he would always pick these blueberries in these big, big pails and bring them home. And my grandma would make this blueberry jam. And then I was just talking to my dad, who's 85, and I'm trying to get him to tell me his whole life story, which is quite wild. And one of the things he told me that I didn't know 2 weeks ago was they didn't have a car, but pretty soon one of the relatives, one of the uncles, got a car. And so every summer they would divide it up with all the siblings, and everyone had a weekend. And my grandpa would use that car to bring my dad and his brother and my grandma to see Lake Superior and to see Gooseberry Falls, and to be able to see the wondrous, huge waterfall coming down that, you know, they thought was as big as Niagara Falls, even though it was Gooseberry Falls. And I thought about that as I was coming and getting ready for today, because that was our Blue-Green Alliance, right? My grandpa working in the mines, but loving the outdoors and knowing that that was such an important part of his life. And that was my background. And I stand before you literally the granddaughter of an iron ore miner, the daughter of a newspaperman and a teacher, and the first woman elected to the Senate in Minnesota. So I believe that these dreams can happen and you can get these things done. And I also believe that we can bring these interests together on the green side and the blue side, as long as we do it in a smart and pragmatic way. So we can have the beauty of that summer's day where my grandpa's out picking blueberries, and we can have the jobs that sustained our family and allowed me to stand before you today. So thank you for your work. Keep it up, and let's get it done. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you.
Morning, folks. Real quick, then we're going to be all done and go to workshop. So I'm Mike with the Blue-Green Alliance. Just a few closing announcements. So if you're tweeting about the conference today, make sure to use the hashtags GJGJ2014 and Repair America. Workshops will be starting very soon at 10:30, so look in your program, find a great workshop, and go to it. We'll be back in the ballroom today at noon, and we've got some great speakers, including the EPA administrator and, most importantly, lunch. So come on back. If you're interested in the aviation industry, we're going to have a great summit at 2 o'clock on aviation and climate change, so check that out. Tomorrow afternoon, we're going to have a great side event on the nationwide network from 3 to 4, so check that out. Also, Organizing for America has 2 great events tomorrow, one on getting your message out via earned media and one on social media. In addition, tomorrow we have the networking reception, so you know you want to come out and have a drink and have a good time. That'll be at 6:30. And then finally on Wednesday, join us on Capitol Hill. We have 2 great events. We have a rally at 10:30 with the Steelworkers and the Blue-Green Alliance, a rally for jobs, a fair economy, and a clean environment. That'll be at 10:30 in the Senate Dirksen building, so come join us there. And then at 2:30 we have a congressional briefing on the House side called Financing America's Repair, Understanding the National Infrastructure Development Bank Act of 2013. Again, if you're tweeting, use those hashtags GJGJ2014 and Repair America. Thank you so much. Go get to those workshops.